have Chelsea Sobolik joining us, and it is just so fun and to get to meet with you today. So tell us just a little bit about yourself, who you like to spend your days with, what life is like at DC in the spring, and what makes you smile, what you've been thinking about, all those things.
So much. Well, I'm Chelsea Sobolik, and I live in the Washington, D.C. area, about 10 minutes away from D.C. I'm married to my husband, Michael. We've been married over 5 years now, which time just absolutely flies. It's crazy. My day job, I do policy and advocacy for an organization called Lifeline Children's Services, and we are a holistic care organization for vulnerable women, children, and families. So my day job, I'm advocating for policies that protect children and help children and families flourish. So I absolutely love it. But in my spare time, I also am a writer, and I just completed my second book. So I'm so thankful to have
Yeah,
that done. And
congratulations.
thank you so much.
Well, DC is such a fun place to visit, but the museums, but also I
Yes.
always remember DC for the day joggers.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like a friend and I
Yes.
went to visit like years ago, and I guess I'm used to seeing people like jogging before work or after work, but literally, like, it doesn't matter what time of day it is,
There
there's
are always,
someone
yes.
jogging. Yes. And
Yes.
we were walking like the Washington Mall, and it started raining, and then my friend and I, she and I, we started laughing because we were having to run into the museum to get out from the rain. We're like, we became the DC
Yes.
by accident. But
Well, springtime in DC is
yeah,
the best. It's so beautiful. It's not too hot. The cherry blossoms are
yeah,
here.
I've heard
Uh,
about those. Yes.
yes, yes. So it's a very nice time in the city.
That's so fun. And like you said, you have served like your day job. You have a lot that you're carrying, but tell us a little bit about your work on and off Capitol Hill and what what you do and a little bit more of that.
I always tell people I feel like I stumbled into the work I'm doing now because I had no idea that the job I'm doing now even existed when I graduated college. But I had studied foreign policy with the intent of moving overseas. And very long story short, the Lord brought me to a nonprofit in DC. And then I ended up having the chance to work on Capitol Hill. And it was so special. My boss had authored a lot of the pro-life legislation at the time, which I care very deeply about that issue. But he also was the co-chair of the Adoption Caucus. So a little known fact: there's caucuses in Congress for everything. There's a fishing caucus. There's a caucus for everything, and all a caucus means is an issue that a group of members can agree on or coalesce around, caucus around. So the Adoption Caucus is Congress's largest bipartisan, so Republicans and Democrats, bipartisan, bicameral, so the House and the Senate, the largest caucus. So I really got to cut my teeth on policies that cared for children and families, and I get to do it now, just in a very different capacity. But it truly is a joy. I always say, my job. There's so many industries in Washington, D.C., like big tech or oil or finance, and all these big industries have a ton of well-paid lobbyists who beat down the door on behalf of that issue. And vulnerable kids don't. They don't have tons and tons of lobbyists in DC or tons and tons of advocates in DC. But my job is to get to go, whether it's on Capitol Hill or at state legislatures, and represent them and be their voice and help advance policies that help them flourish. So I love it. I absolutely think I have a dream job. I absolutely love it.
And so much purpose. And
Yes.
like you said, to be a voice for those who don't have a voice. That's really, really powerful. On the podcast right now, we are wrapping up a series on motherhood, and we're also starting a series called Welcome to the Family about adoption and, foster care. And like we were saying before we pressed record, I really see your story as a bridge between the two. And I just truly believe that those areas in our lives where we have felt the weakest is where God's strength really shines through the most, and our greatest purpose comes. And I really see that in your story with the work you do now, but also your heart for adoption and foster care is directly related to your personal story. And so if you're comfortable, would you tell us more about your adoption story?
Absolutely. So I was not born in the US. I was born in Romania, which is in Eastern Europe. I feel like more people know about that country now because of the Ukrainian war, but Eastern Europe, my parents adopted myself and a little boy. We're not biologically related, but we actually are 11 days apart. So we were raised as twins, which was so fun. Like we're so close in age.
Yeah.
And my parents adopted four more children from Russia. So I'm one of six children, all adopted internationally. So growing up, adoption was very normal for me because all my siblings were adopted. I had friends who were adopted, and we all look similar. So you wouldn't really know I was adopted if I didn't
Yeah.
disclose it. But I saw my parents choose to international adoption is not cheap. And they told me one time, I said, wouldn't your life have been easier if you hadn't have spent $40,000 times six? And they were like, yeah, in some ways, yes, but we chose to invest our earthly treasure in things that are going to outlast us and in things and people that will have eternal value. And um, yeah, I'm so grateful for the gift of adoption. And I don't, not everyone, we can have a conversation about this. I don't think everyone's called to adopt. But for those that are, I really have seen God's grace in my own life. And then my husband and I are actually in our own international adoption process ourselves. So it's really, really special to get to have come from a place of adoption myself and not be part of my story, and then welcome our child home through international adoption as well.
Yeah. No, and let's fast forward a little bit because, or I guess really back up a little bit too, because after being adopted and then now, like with your book, Longing for Motherhood, holding on to hope in the midst of childlessness, you started when you were 19. That's how the book starts. And the same age that Anna, who placed you for adoption, the age she was when she did that. And you're in this cold examination room and your mind is just racing with questions and hoping that the doctor does not confirm your worst fear. Can you bring our listeners back into that memory with you?
Absolutely. So I started college, and that right before I went, I had a doctor's appointment, and they said we think something might be wrong, but we don't know yet. So we're gonna schedule an appointment for the week between the week of Thanksgiving when I was back home. So they said we don't know, but we think we're leaning that way. So I entered or started my freshman year of college with this cloud over me of there could be something wrong. I don't know. And then the week of Thanksgiving, I went to the doctor's office and was told that I was born with a somewhat rare medical condition that would prevent me from having children in the future. And that struggling with infertility, I feel like is hard for anyone. But most people walk through it in the context of a marriage. So they have a partner to process it with and walk through it with. But I was a freshman in college and infertility is such a like a personal thing already. But then to be single, a teenager, going back from college break or going back from Thanksgiving break, and everyone's like, "How was your Thanksgiving?" And you don't want to say, "Well, I just received this devastating news." So I really, really kept it to myself for quite a long time. I've since obviously been very public about it. I wrote a whole book about it, but yeah, it was a really challenging time, not only personally, but also for my faith, because it was the first time in my life that two plus two didn't equals four. Like my good behavior didn't get me what I wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of wrestling and prayer with the Lord about that because it was hard. And I mean, I feel like God created us to be able to bear children post or before Genesis 3. And of course, we know the fall comes in and
Mm-hmm.
mars everything. And so there was a lot of really, really, really hard days and really lonely days.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say I didn't keep myself close to the Lord. The Lord kept himself close to me. Because I felt so weak in that season and that period of time. And just many days felt like I was crawling
Yeah.
towards the Lord and he was so present. And I didn't always feel
Mm-hmm.
this huge thing, but I knew that the Lord was with me. And I felt like that was so helpful in the midst of this really, really trying season.
Yeah. Well, there's several things that you said there that I want to touch on, but one being just that you were 19 and you
Mm-hmm.
like that a lot of people doesn't make it easy to face infertility as a married couple, but you do have someone else that you're working through this with. But then, I just imagine like going back to college and like even dating, like the fear of that
Oh, yes.
expanded.
Yeah.
Um, like you said, to know that like this is what my body was created to do, and now I've been told that I cannot do this. Um, you know, there's one thing you said in your book. I'm going to quote it because I don't want to misread it, but it said, "My faith didn't feel strong enough if God denied me what my heart so desperately longed for." And that just really stood out to me when you said it, because I think in many ways you're a modern day Hannah. Your heart just has this deep longing. And I know there are many who are listening who maybe know the same longing, maybe for a different reason, not the same medical condition, but there are lots. Or there's another longing on their heart. And this statement resonates deeply. Like, I don't know if my faith can actually survive this trial. Like, if you don't give me this, like, this is what I long for more than anything. How can I continue to believe that you're real? And so kind of want to talk a little bit about surrendering our longings, because we see Hannah do that with Samuel, who God gives her Samuel, but you're surrendering kind of like you touched on a little bit. It didn't start off pretty. I know there were days of anxiety and panic attacks. Would you mind just kind of telling us what that surrender looked like for you, just so others don't have to feel so alone in their struggle for surrender?
Absolutely. So I had grown up in a Christian home with very strong Christian parents and prayed the prayers for young kid. That was my story, my background. But then when this trial hit, well, number one, I went to the bookstore and thought, I'm just going to read my way through this trial. And there weren't really any books on the bookshelf that I fit into with this particular trial. So I wrote the book I wish I'd had. But what I did instead was bought a lot of books on the topic of suffering. And I lived in the college dorm room and there was never any time to be alone
Yeah.
to process. So there was this little prayer chapel on my college campus that I would go to often, like after my homework was done, after did like 8 or 9 o'clock, and I just sit there and read and pray, and it wasn't pretty. And I remember telling the Lord, like, okay, I'm gonna read this Bible, your word, one more time, and see in light of this trial, and see if it can actually hold up to suffering. And what I found was, of course, it could, but it wasn't this easy, quick fix of, and I still don't have that longing still isn't met. I mean, my husband and I are in the middle of the adoption process, and I hope and pray it's successful, but it's still, in a lot of ways, it's still the middle of that. But I found two things. Number one, there's so many people in the Bible who have walked through really intense